The sun rose quietly over the wide, open fields of Wyoming. Golden light spilled across the dry grass, brushing against the fences and the faded red barn. Inside the small farmhouse, a man moved slowly, his boots heavy against the wooden floor. His name was Thomas Reed, a rancher, a husband once and now a widower. For years, Thomas had lived the same way. Mornings began before dawn with the sound of roosters and the smell of black coffee. He'd saddle his horse, check the fences, and tend to the cattle. The rhythm never changed. It was the only thing that kept him from thinking too much. The silence of the land was his only companion, and most days he preferred it that way. But when the evenings came and the sky turned soft orange, that silence began to feel different, heavier. He'd sit on the porch, hat in hand, staring at the horizon. Sometimes he'd talk to her. Not loud enough for anyone to hear, but just enough to feel like she was still there. Her name was Clara, his wife, the love of his life, the woman he thought he'd grow old with. It had been almost 7 years since that day, the day she never came back. A storm, a lost trail, a broken horse. The sheriff said she likely didn't survive. Thomas refused to believe it at first. He searched for days, then weeks. But the land gave nothing back. No answers, no trace, just emptiness. Since then, the ranch had been both his shelter and his prison. Every corner held a memory, her laughter, her favorite flowers by the window, the way she'd hum while cooking. He never changed a thing in the house. Her hat still hung by the door. Her books still sat on the shelf, dust settling like time itself. Neighbors said he should move on, maybe sell the place, maybe start over. But Thomas couldn't. This was the only place that still felt like her. The wind that passed through the open fields whispered her name. The nights were long, and sometimes he'd wake up thinking he heard her voice. He'd roll over, only to find an empty side of the bed and the echo of a memory that refused to fade. Thomas could still remember the first time he met Clara as if it had happened yesterday. It was spring, and the town's annual fair had just begun. The air was filled with the scent of roasted corn and fresh hay. He was 25, still figuring out what it meant to run a ranch on his own, and she was the new schoolteacher who had just moved to town. She wasn't like anyone else he'd ever met. Clara had a light in her that made everything around her seem alive. She laughed easily, asked questions about everything, and looked at people like she was really listening. When she looked at him, it felt like she could see right through all the walls he'd built around himself. He had gone to the fair that day only to buy feed for his cattle, but by sunset, he'd found something much more valuable, a reason to stay. They talked by the fence as the music from the dance carried through the air. He remembered the way the wind played with her hair and how her dress brushed against the grass. She spoke about her dreams of teaching, of wanting a quiet life close to nature, and he told her about the ranch, about his father who had passed it down to him, and about how lonely the nights could get. It wasn't love at first sight, not the kind that explodes like lightning. It was something slower, steadier, like the roots of an old oak tree pushing deep into the earth. A year later, they were married under that same wide Wyoming sky. It was a simple ceremony, just family, a few close friends, and the sound of the wind running through the fields. Thomas built her a small white house at the edge of the property, with her favorite rose bushes out front and a porch swing that looked west toward the setting sun. He wanted her to have everything she dreamed of. Clara turned that house into a home. She filled it with laughter, warmth, and little touches of herself. Hand-sewn curtains, wildflowers in old jars, the smell of cinnamon in the mornings. They were happy in the kind of quiet way that doesn't need words. She'd wake early, pack his lunch, and kiss him before he left to work the fields. In the evenings, they'd eat together by the fire, talk about the day, and make plans for the future. She wanted children. He did too. They'd even chosen names. Life was simple, but it was theirs, and for Thomas it was perfect. Then came the day everything changed. It started like any other, a morning of soft rain, the smell of wet earth, and Clara in her yellow coat, smiling as she waved from the barn. She said she was going to town to visit her sister. The road wasn't far, but storms came fast in the valley, and by afternoon the rain turned into something fierce. The sky went black, thunder cracked across the hills, and the wind howled so hard it shook the house. Hours passed and she didn't return. When night fell, Thomas rode out, calling her name through the storm. The rain stung his eyes, but he kept going. The next day, the sheriff and a few ranchers joined the search. They found her horse near the river, its saddle broken, but no sign of her. Days turned to weeks and still nothing. The current was strong that season, and everyone said the same thing, that the river had taken her. Thomas didn't believe it. Not then. Not for a long time. He searched every corner of that valley, every old trail, every patch of woods. He rode until his horse went lame and his hands were raw from the rains. He refused to give up because something in his heart told him she was still out there. But as the months went by and no trace appeared, hope turned into something else. A dull ache that sat in his chest and never left. The town moved on. People whispered that he was still waiting for a ghost, but Thomas didn't care what they said. He stopped going into town. He stopped talking much at all. His only comfort was the land, the same land they had dreamed of growing old on. At night, he'd sit in her old rocking chair, listening to the sounds of the house. Sometimes he thought he heard her footsteps on the porch, or her voice calling from outside. He'd rise quickly, open the door, and stand there for a long time, staring into the dark, until he realized it was just the wind. Other times, he'd wake from dreams so real that he'd reach for her hand, only to find the cold sheets beside him. There was one night, about 2 years after she vanished, when he found something strange, a small box under the floorboard of their bedroom. Inside were letters she'd written but never sent. One was addressed to him. It was unfinished. The ink had faded, but the words were clear enough. "If something ever happens to me, promise you'll keep the ranch alive. It's our dream, Tom. It's our home." He read that line so many times that he memorized it. It became his reason to keep going. He worked harder than ever, repaired every broken fence, mended every roof, rebuilt what time had taken. But no matter how busy he stayed, the loneliness always found him. Some nights he'd sit by the fire, turning the ring on his finger, thinking about the way she used to hum when she cooked, or how her eyes crinkled when she laughed. Years passed, but the memories never faded. The seasons came and went, winters cold enough to crack the wood, summers bright enough to burn the fields, yet inside him it was always the same. A quiet, steady ache. He didn't talk about Clara anymore, but he never stopped thinking about her. There were mornings when he thought about leaving, selling the ranch, and starting somewhere new. But every time he packed a bag, something stopped him. Maybe it was the photo by the bed, maybe it was the smell of her old coat, or maybe it was that promise, the one she'd written, the one he'd kept alive with every sunrise. And so he stayed. A man bound to his land, to his memories, to the love that refused to die. Until one day, when the past he'd been clinging to came knocking on his door, not as a ghost, not as a dream, but as two small voices calling him something he hadn't heard in years. "Daddy." The morning started like any other. The same wind pushed across the grasslands, the same creak of the old barn doors echoed through the valley. Thomas had long grown used to the predictability of his life. Each sound, each smell, each step had become part of a pattern that filled the empty space where his wife's voice used to be. It was the quiet that both comforted and haunted him. The stillness of the ranch was almost holy and sometimes unbearably heavy. He rose before the sun, brewed his black coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from him. The steam from the mug curled upward, like smoke from a memory. He used to pour a second cup out of habit, but he'd stopped doing that years ago. The ritual only reminded him of what was missing. Outside, the sky was bruised with early light. He stepped out onto the porch, boots scraping against the old wood. His eyes wandered toward the corral, the same one he and Clara had built together when they first married. Every nail, every plank carried her touch. Thomas walked to the barn, the cold morning air biting at his face. Inside, the smell of hay and leather mixed with dust and time. He checked the feed, brushed the horses, and spoke to them under his breath soft words that no one else would ever hear. The animals were his only witnesses now. They didn't answer back, but in their calm silence, he found something close to peace. By noon, the sun was bright and sharp, and sweat gathered on his brow. He took off his hat, wiped his face, and looked out across the endless land. The wind rippled through the grass like waves in a golden sea. It was beautiful, yes, but it was also lonely. The kind of beauty that reminds you how small you are. How everything you love can be swallowed by silence and still keep moving as if nothing happened. Sometimes, neighbors would stop by, a passing ranch hand, an old friend bringing supplies from town. They'd talk for a few minutes about cattle prices or the weather, but the conversations always ended the same way. A polite nod, a quiet goodbye, and the dust from their trucks fading down the dirt road. People had stopped asking how he was. They already knew the answer. At night, when the ranch fell quiet again, Thomas would light the old kerosene lamp and open the box of letters Clara had written. He'd read them in the same order, even though he could recite most by heart. Her handwriting was soft and looping, full of warmth. "Tom," one letter began, "you have the kindest eyes. When you look at the land, I can see the way you love it, and that's why I love you." He read that line every night. It made him feel close to her, like she was just in the next room, humming her favorite tune. But then there were the dreams. They came more often now, strange, vivid, and cruelly kind. Sometimes he saw her standing at the edge of the field, smiling, her hair catching the sunlight. She never spoke in those dreams. She just stood there watching him. He'd wake with tears on his cheeks and the sound of her laughter fading into the dark. The seasons moved on without mercy. Winter buried the land in white silence, spring painted it green again, and summer burned it gold. Through it all, Thomas stayed, tending to his land like a man bound by promise and ghost. He'd fix fences in the morning, patch roofs in the afternoon, and sit by the fire at night, staring into the flames until his eyes blurred. One evening, he went to town to pick up supplies, something he rarely did anymore. As he walked through the small grocery store, he caught sight of a young couple laughing near the counter. The woman had a light brown braid just like Clara used to wear, and for a moment Thomas forgot to breathe. He froze, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. When she turned around, reality hit. It wasn't her. Of course it wasn't. But that fleeting moment left him shaken. He drove home in silence, gripping the steering wheel as if it could keep him from falling apart. When he reached the ranch, the sun was sinking behind the hills. The sky was streaked with deep orange and violet. He stopped by the fence and leaned against it, staring out into the distance. Somewhere in the fields, a hawk cried, its echo carrying across the land. The sound made his chest tighten. He thought about how many years had passed since that storm, 7, maybe more, and how every single day had carried her absence like a shadow. That night he sat on the porch long after the stars came out. The wind picked up, brushing against the wheat and whispering through the trees. He closed his eyes and listened. For a brief second, he could almost hear her voice again, faint, soft, calling his name the way she used to. His eyes opened quickly, heart racing, but there was nothing there. Only the empty land and the old rocking chair swaying back and forth in the breeze. He let out a long breath and tilted his head back, watching the stars flicker above. "Clara," he murmured under his breath, "if you can hear me, I'm still here." And then, as if answering his prayer, a sound broke the stillness, faint but real. Not the wind, not the creak of the wood. A sound he hadn't heard in years. Someone knocking on the door. He froze, his heart beating hard against his ribs. He turned toward the house, the porch light casting long shadows. Another knock came, this time louder. Thomas rose slowly, his boots heavy against the steps. He reached for the doorknob, his hand trembling slightly. For a moment, he thought maybe it was just his imagination again, another trick of the night. But then he heard it, small voices whispering on the other side. "Do you think he's home?" one asked, barely above a whisper. "I think so," said the other. "Mama said this is the place." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't heard the word Mama Asterisk spoken in his home for years. The sound of it made his hands go cold. He opened the door slowly, and there, standing on the porch, were two little girls. Identical. Same dark hair, same brown eyes, eyes that looked exactly like Clara's. They stood close together, holding hands, their faces half lit by the porch light. And then, in perfect unison, they looked up at him and said the one word that shattered the silence completely. Daddy. For a moment, Thomas couldn't move. The air felt heavy still, as if the world itself had stopped turning. The two little girls stood there on his porch, their small hands clasped tightly together, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. The word they'd just spoken still hung in the air, Daddy. It didn't make sense. He blinked, half expecting them to disappear like one of his dreams. But they didn't. They were real. Their cheeks were flushed from the cold, their clothes dusty from travel, and their eyes, those eyes, were unmistakably familiar. Who are you? He finally managed, his voice rough and uncertain. The taller one stepped forward, her chin trembling slightly. Mama said you'd ask that, she said softly, clutching a folded piece of paper in her hand. She said to give you this. Thomas hesitated before reaching out. His fingers brushed the paper, trembling as he unfolded it. The handwriting struck him instantly, looping, neat, and heartbreakingly familiar. He felt the world tilt beneath him. It was Clara's handwriting. He began to read, his lips moving silently. The first line stopped him cold. My dearest Thomas, if you are reading this, it means our daughters have found you. He read the words again. Our daughters. His hands began to shake, the paper rustling softly in the quiet night. The girls stood still, watching him with anxious eyes. The letter continued. I wanted to come back to you, but I couldn't. Not then. I had to keep the girls safe. I know you must have thought I was gone forever, and I can't ask you to forgive me, but please believe me when I say everything I did was to protect them, and you. Thomas's chest tightened. He swallowed hard, reading every word, his heart hammering louder with each line. Clara told him about the accident, how she had been thrown from her horse, found injured by a traveling family who took her in, how she had been too weak to travel for months, and then before she could return home she learned she was pregnant, with twins. She had written, I wanted to come home, Thomas. Every day I wanted to. But someone came looking for me, a man who blamed us for the land dispute years ago. He threatened to hurt you if I ever returned. So I stayed away, thinking I was keeping you safe. I raised the girls as best I could, always telling them about their father, the man who loved the land, the one with kind eyes and a strong heart. Thomas lowered the letter, staring at the girls again. They looked up at him shyly, as if waiting for something, maybe for him to yell or cry or believe them. He could barely breathe. Every part of him wanted to reject it. It was too much, too impossible. But the longer he looked at them, the more his heart knew what his mind couldn't yet accept. They had Clara's smile, her dimples, her soft gaze. He crouched down slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. What are your names? The smaller one spoke this time, her voice light and trembling. I'm Lily, she said, glancing at her sister, and this is Rose. Lily and Rose. The names Clara had once mentioned when they dreamed about children, sitting by the fire long ago. He felt a lump rise in his throat, sharp and aching. Where's your mama now? He asked quietly. Lily bit her lip and looked down at the porch. Rose squeezed her hand tighter. She got sick, Rose said softly. She told us she wasn't gonna make it. She said when she was gone, we had to come here. She said this is where we'd find you. Thomas's knees gave out and he sank down on the porch. The letter fell from his hand. His mind was spinning, joy, grief, disbelief, all tangled together. His Clara had been alive. She had lived, loved, suffered, and raised these two little girls alone. And now she was gone again. For good. He looked at them, these children who had crossed miles to find him, their faces full of both fear and hope. He wanted to speak, to comfort them, but his voice broke before he could form words. Instead, he reached out, and without hesitation, the twins stepped forward and threw their small arms around him. The moment they did, something inside him shattered and healed all at once. He held them tightly, his rough hands trembling as he pulled them close. Their hair smelled faintly of the road, of dust and lavender. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, tears ran freely down his face. He didn't try to stop them. They stayed like that for a long time, the three of them wrapped in the soft glow of the porch light, the world around them silent except for the wind. When he finally pulled back, he brushed their hair gently from their faces. "You must be tired," he said softly. "Come inside." The girls nodded, and he led them into the house that had been silent for so long. Their small feet pattered across the wooden floor, and Thomas suddenly noticed how alive the place felt again. It was as if the air itself had changed. Lily looked around the room, her eyes landing on a photo on the mantel. It was Clara, smiling on their wedding day. "That's Mama," she whispered. Thomas followed her gaze, his heart twisting. "Yes," he said quietly. "That's your Mama." Rose walked over to the chair by the fire, Clara's chair, and touched it gently. "She told us you used to sit here and read to her," she said. "She said you had the nicest voice." Thomas didn't know what to say. His throat burned. He looked around the room, the photos, the books, the memories, and suddenly realized how much of Clara still lived here. It was as if she had never truly left. As the night deepened, he made them warm milk and watched them drift to sleep on the couch, curled up together under an old quilt. He sat nearby, the letter open again in his hands, reading the last few lines over and over. "If life ever leads them to you, love them as I would have. Let them know they were never fatherless. Tell them I loved you always, and that my heart stayed on that ranch waiting for you." Thomas stared into the fire, his vision blurring. Outside, the wind howled through the fields, but this time it didn't sound lonely. It sounded like a whisper from her, carried through the night. He reached over, brushed a curl from Lily's face, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet, aching sense of peace, mixed with wonder. He leaned back in his chair, watching the flames dance and flicker, and for the first time in a long time he whispered into the room, not out of habit but with purpose. "Clara, they found me." The next morning, sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and golden. Thomas woke to the faint sound of giggles drifting from the kitchen. For a moment he thought he was dreaming again, but the laughter didn't fade, it grew louder, brighter. He sat up slowly, his joints stiff, his heart uncertain. The air in the house felt different now. It wasn't empty anymore. He walked toward the kitchen, his boots quiet on the old wooden floor. There at the table sat the two girls, Lily and Rose. They were eating the last of his biscuits, hard and plain, but they seemed to enjoy them as if they were the best thing they'd ever tasted. When they saw him, both straightened up. "Good morning, Daddy," Lily said with a shy smile. The word still hit him like a hammer, warm and heavy all at once. He cleared his throat, unsure what to say. "Good morning," he finally managed. "You girls sleep all right," Rose nodded. "Your couch is really soft," she said. "Mama said you built this house with your own hands." He paused, his gaze dropping for a second. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We built it together." Lily looked around, her eyes shining with curiosity. "It's pretty here," she said. "Different from where we lived." Thomas pulled out a chair and sat across from them. "Where did you live?" "In a little town," Rose answered. "By the hills. Mama taught us to read and sew. She said we'd come here one day when it was time." He nodded slowly. Every word they spoke felt like a piece of a life he'd missed, years that had existed without him. A part of Clara he'd never known. He couldn't stop staring at them. The way Lily's hair fell in loose curls just like Clara's, the way Rose tilted her head when she listened. Everything about them carried traces of her. After breakfast, the girls followed him outside. The day was clear, the sky endless. They trailed behind him, their laughter echoing across the ranch. It was the first time in years that he'd heard a sound like that on this land. They asked about everything, the horses, the fences, the cattle, the trees. He answered each question patiently, though his heart trembled with every word. At one point, Lily ran ahead, chasing a butterfly, and tripped in the dirt. Before he even realized it, Thomas hurried forward, kneeling beside her. "You all right?" he asked, brushing the dust from her knees. She nodded, smiling through her tears. "Mama used to do that too," she said softly. "She always said dirt just means you've been living." He froze, his hand still resting gently on her knee. The simple sentence hit him harder than she could have known. Clara's voice echoed in his mind. He could almost hear her saying those exact words years ago. As the day passed, the three of them worked together. He showed them how to feed the horses, how to brush their manes, how to gather eggs from the chicken coop. They were quick learners, full of questions and laughter. Every moment felt unreal, like a memory being written in reverse, the family he thought he'd lost slowly reappearing before his eyes. When the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch eating the stew he'd made. The girls told him stories about their life with Clara, how she used to hum lullabies, how she would sit by the window writing letters she never sent. Thomas listened silently, his throat tightening with every word. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Just hearing about her again was enough to make the world feel alive. After dinner, Lily asked, "Can we see her room?" He hesitated. The room hadn't been touched since the day Clara disappeared. He still kept her clothes folded, her brush on the dresser, her favorite shawl hanging by the window. But he nodded and led them down the narrow hall. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. The girls stepped inside, quiet now. Sunlight filtered through the faded curtains, catching dust in the air. Rose reached out and touched the shawl. "It smells like her," she whispered. Thomas swallowed hard. "I never moved anything," he said. "Couldn't bring myself to." Lily turned and smiled at him. "She'd like that." He sat down on the edge of the bed, running a hand along the old quilt Clara had sewn years ago. The girls climbed up beside him, curling against his arms. They sat there in silence for a while, three hearts beating in rhythm, three pieces of a story stitched back together by love and loss. Later that night, after tucking them into bed, Thomas went back to the porch. The stars were bright, scattered like silver dust across the sky. He held Clara's letter again, reading the words over and over until he could almost hear her voice whispering them. "Let them know they were never alone. Even from afar, I watched over you both." He closed his eyes and felt the wind brush against his face, soft, familiar, almost tender. The next few days passed in a kind of dream. The girls helped him around the ranch, learning the rhythm of his life. They named the calves, sang while carrying water, and turned chores into games. Their laughter filled the empty corners of the house that had long forgotten what joy sounded like. At times, Thomas found himself standing at a distance, just watching them, amazed by how easily they belonged there. Every morning, they woke him with gentle taps on his arm. Every night, they asked for stories about their mother. He told them everything, how he met her at the fair, how she loved the smell of rain, how she used to fall asleep on the porch swing after long days. He didn't hide his tears when they came, and the girls didn't mind. Lily once placed her tiny hand on his and said softly, "Mama said crying doesn't mean you're weak, it means your heart remembers." Those words stayed with him. For the first time in years, Thomas laughed. Real laughter, deep and unforced. He found himself singing again while working. The ranch began to look alive, not just with grass and cattle, but with hope. One morning, he found the twins playing near the fence, weaving flowers into crowns. They ran up to him, giggling, and placed them on his head. "You look like a king," Rose said. He laughed so hard he startled the horses. But beneath the laughter, he felt something shift inside him, the weight he'd carried for years beginning to lift. As evening came, he sat with them by the fire. Lily rested her head on his shoulder and Rose curled up by his arm. The flames danced in their eyes, and for a long moment he simply watched them, feeling the warmth seep into the cracks of his heart. The ranch was quiet again, but not with loneliness, with peace. For the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It felt full. Full of the love that had found its way back home in the shape of two little girls who called him Daddy. The next morning brought with it a different kind of light, soft, warm, and alive. The kind that felt new. Thomas stood by the window, watching as the twins ran through the yard, their laughter cutting through the quiet like birdsong. The ranch had changed in just a few short days. The air didn't carry that same weight anymore. The house that had once felt like a shrine to loss was now full of footsteps, questions, and giggles that seemed to wake every corner of it. He leaned on the windowsill, smiling without realizing it. For years, he'd tried to fill the emptiness with work fixing fences, tending cattle, mending things that could be mended. But now, for the first time, he wasn't fixing anything. He was living again. Lily stopped to pick a handful of wildflowers by the fence while Rose ran toward the barn, calling out to the horses. The sight made his chest ache in the best way possible. He couldn't help but think of Clara. How proud she would have been to see him like this. He still missed her in a way that words could never explain, but that ache no longer felt like a wound. It felt like a heartbeat. When the girls came running back toward the porch, their cheeks pink from the wind, Lily held out a flower crown she'd made. "For you," she said proudly. "Mama said you used to make her ones like this." He crouched down, taking the delicate crown in his rough hands. "She told you that, huh?" Rose nodded. "She said you'd always pick the ones that matched her dress." He laughed softly. "She was right. She always liked the yellow ones best." He placed the crown gently on Lily's head, his hands shaking slightly. "Now, I guess it's your turn to wear them." The girls giggled and ran off again, their laughter echoing through the air. He watched them until they disappeared behind the barn, then looked toward the sky. "You did good, Clara," he whispered. Later that day, he took them riding, one on each side of him, their tiny hands gripping the saddle horn. The horses trotted slowly across the open field, the same field he'd once walked alone so many times. Now it looked different. Every blade of grass seemed brighter, every sound sharper. He showed them where he and Clara had planted the oak tree their first year of marriage, and how it had grown strong and tall. The girls ran to it, circling its thick trunk with their arms, laughing as they tried to measure how big it had gotten. "This tree's older than you," Thomas said with a grin, "older than both of you together." Rose looked up at him, squinting against the sun. "Do you think Mama's up there watching us?" He hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the horizon. "I do," he said finally, "and I think she's smiling right now." That night, as dusk fell, the three of them sat by the fire again. The flames painted the walls with flickering light, and the air smelled faintly of smoke and stew. Lily leaned against his arm, half asleep, while Rose traced patterns in the ashes with a stick. "Daddy," Rose murmured after a while, "do you miss Mama a lot?" He took a deep breath before answering. "Every day," he said quietly. "But having you two here, it feels like she's close again." Lily stirred, whispering without opening her eyes. "Mama said we'd make you smile again." Thomas's throat tightened. He looked down at their small faces, peaceful, safe, and felt something shift deep inside him. For years, he'd thought love ended when life did. But now he understood that love didn't disappear. It changed form. It found new ways to stay alive. As the fire dimmed, he carried the twins to their room, the one that had once been full of silence. Now it was filled with soft breathing, the faint smell of lavender, and the quiet hum of life. He stood there for a long time, just watching them sleep, their faces glowing in the moonlight. The ranch had never been this still, not with loneliness but with peace. Outside, the wind brushed gently through the grass, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. In the days that followed, word spread around town about the twins. People began to visit again, old friends, neighbors, folks who hadn't set foot on the ranch in years. They came out of curiosity at first, then out of kindness. The girls charmed everyone, just like their mother had. Thomas found himself talking again, laughing again. The loneliness that had wrapped itself around him for so long began to unravel. One evening, after putting the girls to bed, he sat on the porch with his guitar, an old thing that had gathered dust for nearly a decade. He strummed a few notes, hesitant at first. Then the melody came back to him, the same tune Clara used to hum while cooking dinner. His voice cracked when he started to sing, but he kept going. The wind carried the sound across the fields, and somewhere deep down, he felt like she was listening. The stars blinked above him, quiet and patient. He leaned back, closing his eyes, the guitar resting across his lap. For so long, he had thought that his story had ended. But now he realized maybe it had only been paused, waiting for this moment, waiting for them. Inside the house, he could hear Lily talking in her sleep, mumbling something about horses and flowers. Rose turned over, murmuring softly, and he smiled. He thought of Clara again, her laugh, her eyes, the warmth of her hand in his. He thought about the promise she'd written in her letter. Let them find you and love will find its way home. He looked out across the dark fields, the land that had seen everything, joy, sorrow, love, loss, and now something new, hope. The wind brushed his face like a familiar touch. He didn't speak this time. He just sat there quietly, listening to the soft rhythm of the night, and for the first time in a very long while, the silence didn't hurt at all.